Hello everyone, this is John from Coins, RPGs, and more. Last night, I filmed a video. I thought it was going to be I knew it was going to be a little bit long, but it got a bit longer than I expected it was. The topic of the video was RPG systems that have inspired me, primarily those RPG systems that aren't D20 or Dungeons and Dragons based games, or Dungeons and Dragons itself, I should say. And it ended up being over an hour long. And I've gotten close to that a time or two with some of my videos. But it felt like a bit much. It felt like I can condense that down a little bit. So maybe someday I'll post the full version of it. But right now, I really want to condense it down. This is not an exhaustive list of the RPGs that have influenced how I game. There's many that have influenced my gaming. And most of them are not D&D. D&D, or in its various forms, whether it was second edition where I started, third edition where my love for the game really blossomed, or fifth edition where I kind of, I like it, it's okay, but it's more tolerance than actual love at this point. But that's be that what it may. So that's D&D in a nutshell. There's things about D&D that I love. I love Ravenloft. Ravenloft is my all-time favorite setting. It's actually the first setting book I ever read for any D&D product. I read the Ravenloft handbook for second edition before I read the player's handbook for second edition. That was my introduction to Dungeons & Dragons as a game, was Ravenloft. And I loved the Gothic horror aesthetic of it. Now, that's different than my first introduction to role-playing games in general, which was Space 1889. That was the first role-playing game book I ever read, was Space 1889. Loved that book. I was able to read it thanks to my brother, who happened to pick up a copy at one point, or he received a copy as a gift from our parents, because our mother, was a bit concerned about Dungeons and Dragons itself, because of the devils and the magic and all and that stuff. She wasn't full satanic panic or nothing like that, but she was a bit concerned. So she didn't really want to do that. But when she saw Space 1889 by I think it was GDW, that did the book, the original book, she said, "Well, this is Jules Verne. This is great. This is 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. This is all these things, all this Jules Verne stuff." And she was just like, "Oh gosh, that's great." And so she bought that book from my brother, and he and I kind of toyed with it. We never actually played. We made characters at one point, but we never really got much further than that because I was a bit distracted as a kid, and he, it wasn't. I think he enjoyed it, but he saw some issues with it, which later I kind of came to understand as I grew a bit older and started to understand themes and motifs. But still, Space 1889 holds a special place in my heart as the first system that got me into role-playing games. But I'm not going to talk about that today, mostly because I don't have a physical copy of it anymore. I have bought and sold that game like 2 or 3 times throughout my own personal history, and it just never sticks. I love it. I love reading it, but I've never been able to play it. So it kind of it's one of those things that sits in the memory and is fun, and I enjoy that. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. Today we're going to talk about the systems that really wowed me, the systems that made a difference, that changed how I saw role-playing games. And almost all these systems are non-D20 based, and that's important. They are systems that have made me kind of move away from the D20 mindset. That kind of keeps going here, and I kind of went like that for a while. So, with no further ado, let's get into the systems. I'm going to try to make this a little faster than the original video, so I'm not going to go into as much detail. All right, first, the Riddle of Steel. This is my precious. This is a darling book. This book, to buy this book now would cost you somewhere like $70. It's not a cheap book. It might even be more than that at this point. I haven't looked in a while. This is my pretty. And I like this book. This book had a massive influence on me for several reasons. One, it is a role-playing game that does melee combat well. It does melee combat in a very dynamic fashion. It makes playing a fighter the most interesting part of the game. And I love playing fighters. From the moment that I first was introduced to D&D, It was the fighter that I wanted to play, and I have never really changed. Sometimes I like playing a paladin because Knights in Shining Armor are also my jam. In fact, Knights in Shining Armor is my primary jam, and Paladins sometimes fit that, although D&D versions of Paladins really don't fit what I feel the actual inspiration of Paladins was supposed to be, which was Sir Lancelot. A Paladin was supposed to be a Sir Lancelot or the peers of Charlemagne, these holy warriors that were just absolutely the top of their line and everything. So I really loved that mindset, and D&D does not really do that well because fighters tend to be the characters that people play when they don't really understand the system, because fighters tend to be easy to play. In 5th edition, that's not as much, because now you can get you battle master fighters, and they can be a bit more complex, and they have a lot of tools to play with, and I enjoy that. I could actually enjoy playing fighters again. But anyway, so this game makes fighters not just enjoyable, but it makes them really fascinating to play. It makes combat very tactical, very responsive, especially the one-on-one duels. So this system did that really well. The other thing the system did really well is it pairs character advancement, character advancement with achieving goals, your character's goals, as well as following your character's passions. And that is something that I had never really encountered before, because everything had been keyed to experience points, which we got by completing adventures and killing monsters in D&D. So that was my first introduction to that in this book. I have everything that was released by Driftwood Publishing for this system. Everything, all the official releases, and they are, I hold on to them. You can get them out of me. You can pry them from my cold, dead hands. Let's put it that way. I have never actually gotten to play this system, unfortunately, and someday I really want to. Part of it is because the system, for me, some reason, like I don't really understand, but even though I get the combat system, and the combat system is why I really want to play this system, the character creation just seems really opaque to me. I cannot grok the character creation of this as much. I can get the basic concepts of it. I can follow those along. Maybe if I sat down with it and just did it, it would make more sense. But right now, character creation is a bit opaque for me. And I haven't touched it in a few years. So maybe if I came back to it with a more mature mindset than I had, 10 years ago or whatever, when I originally bought this stuff, I'd understand it more. So, but that's Riddle of Steel. Riddle of Steel, huge influence on me on how to make, on how combat, melee combat especially, can be dynamic and can be the center of the show, while magic kind of takes a backseat and it plays a supportive role and is still cool, but is not the star of the show the way it is for D&D. Because in D&D, magic kind of becomes the star of the show, especially in 5th edition, because almost everybody can have magic. A lot of people get magic, and at some point, magic becomes the be-all and end-all, even for the classic fighter with a sword, because if they don't get that magic sword, they can't do squat, right? Okay. So let's go to the next system. The next system that had a big influence on me. And that system, believe it or not, is Legendary Adventures. Spelled with a J instead of a G. Legendary Adventures is what I kind of consider to be, this is my phrasing, is kind of the magnum opus of Gary Gygax. It is the last thing that he really worked on seriously during his lifetime, and it is the love, the thing that he poured all of his love and his experience into after many years as a game designer. Now, the parts of Legendary Adventures that I think are really cool, one, it is a D100 system, and I really like that. I like the D100 systems. I have a hard time with RuneQuest. Mostly because of the magic system that they use. The magic system just doesn't jive with me. It's a bit weird. So I need to find a better way to understand RuneQuest magic system, or play RuneQuest without the magic system in order to be able to get RuneQuest. That's not here. So Legendary Adventures is a D100 system that I can grok. I can pay attention to it. I get it. It's fun. It has incredibly comprehensive equipment lists to the point where they're just fascinating. They're really cool. There's a lot of stuff. The art is fun. There's a lot of cool line art in here. And the line art tells a story, and that's fun. The other thing that this system does, which I think is really neat, is when you have a weapon and you deal damage, all damage is rolled on a D20. And I think that's really neat, because how they change it. So in standard D&D style role-playing games, the damage die type changes by which weapon you use. So that dagger does d4 damage, while the greatsword does 2d6 damage. And because the die types change depending on the weapon you're using, then the potential damage changes. The larger weapons deal larger potential damage. And so people tend to gravitate towards the larger weapons. But I mean, I get that. I can kind of understand it. I played it for a long time, so it's kind of hard to not get it. But I never was really quite satisfied with it, which is why when I was messing with my own game creation, I tended to stick with every weapon does the same amount of damage. One of the reasons why I like the OSR and every weapon does d6 damage plus or minus 1 point, depending on the size of the weapon, because it's to me, it's the skill of the user that dictates how damaging that weapon ought to be, not just the weapon itself. If you are a person who is very skilled with a dagger, you are going to deal more damage than that person who is not skilled with a greatsword, but happens to swing it and connect once. That person with the dagger is just going to be more vicious with it, and I think that should be reflected in the damage that is dealt. So, but what Legendary Adventure does is they have minimum damage for their weapons. So a dagger has 1d20 damage, and it will deal between 1 and 20 points of damage. The high end is the cap, but it's the same cap for every weapon. The greatsword does 11 through 20 damage, rolled on a d20. Any number less than 11 is treated as an 11. And what this does is the high point of the damage roll is still capped at 20, just like every other weapon. It's the minimum damage that changes. And I think that's very cool because it allows you to have that moment of, well, of course, the greatsword at least is going to do this much damage, but the potential is only the same as what the dagger is. So you can still, that dagger can have that amazing roll and do 20 points of damage in one attack and outdamage the greatsword, especially in the hands of a skilled user. And I think that's pretty cool. So that's the other thing that Legendary Adventure does. There's a lot more that this system does. I don't have time to cover it all, but that influenced me greatly, and it's one of the reasons why I really was able to glomp onto the OSR and D6 damage for all weapons, because that just made it made sense to me, and it's thanks to the system. So let's go to the third system that had a big influence on me. That is, speaking of the OSR, this is Swords and Wizardry White Box. This system, I've already talked about in previous videos, so I'm not going to talk about it too much, but this system made a huge difference in me because it showed me how modular a role-playing system can be and how easy it is to take a system. It can be to take a system and hack it and turn it into exactly what you want. And I love that. This is not my favorite version of the Swords and Wizardry system. That's still being Swords and Wizardry Continual Light, which a second edition of is going to be coming out within the next few months. And I'm looking forward to that. I'll be talking about that on the channel as soon as I can get my grubby little hands on it. But this one is the one that I first read. I read this first, and it made a huge impact on me. So this is amazing. All right, moving on. I know I'm being really fast. I'm probably a little more hyper. Maybe this is interesting to people. Maybe it isn't. It's not as conversational as I usually do. But I want to make sure that I'm covering this thing and not having it be an hour long. So let's go to the next system that has had an outsized impact upon my role-playing experience, and that is the Cypher System. I have not done a video on the Cypher System yet, but I will do a video on the Cypher System in the future because I like it and I have a lot of custom things that I do with it that I think are really cool. The Cypher System, this is the second edition of the Cypher System game, and it is really neat. I bought the first edition of the game, and I loved it, and I read it, and I used it for years, or at least a year, I should say. And then the second edition came out, and I bought it instantly, and the moment that I read it, this book automatically replaced my first edition Cypher System book, and I have used it a lot, and I have bookmarked a lot of things on it, so I can get to where I need to go quickly. And my first introduction to this was through Numenera, like many people, and I love Numenera. I actually was able to play a over 2 years long campaign with the same gaming group taking place in Numenera, and that showed me the awesomeness of the underlying of the gameplay. Not only was the campaign was great and the GM was fantastic, well done, dude. But also the gameplay was right up my alley. That everything being player facing, everything being something that I could control. I could control how hard I hit, how much damage I dealt, and I could allocate all of my resources, and it controlled how well I defended myself from an attack. it's very responsive. It's very under your control. So you're never feeling like something is being done to you by the DM. You always feel like you're in somewhat control. And if you fail, then it's not the DM who's done you dirty. Your failure is just simply your failure. And I kind of liked that. I thought it took a lot of pressure off the DM. I loved running the Cypher system because of that, because it takes a lot of pressure off. It turns it into more of a storytelling environment and situation instead of well, let's create this complicated combat encounter because I really need to challenge the players and I need to, combat their abilities. So in order to give them a challenging game instead of just having them, do whatever. So Cypher System has had a huge impact on me. It also is one of the most diverse character creation systems I've ever encountered in an RPG. And I really like it for that. There's a few things that I've seen where people have tried to take the Cypher System style character creation and meld that into the OSR. One of those books is on order. When I get a physical copy of that book, when it arrives, I'm going to give it a read through. I've already read some of the PDF, and I have a hard time with PDF sometimes because when I read things on a computer screen, it doesn't always stick in the old brain pan. But when I read it on paper, pen and paper, I'm really able to grok it a lot better. It's able to remain in my brain a lot longer. So I'm a big fan of reading physical books. Anyway, so that's the Cypher System. I'll talk more about it in another video. Next, we're going to talk about a system. Now, this is the Fantasy Trip. This is the big book of the Fantasy Trip. This has all the rules of the recent re-release edition. This is by Steve Jackson Games. It's pretty cool. Now, the Fantasy Trip, in and of itself, this system did not really blow my mind. It was neat because it's basically an OSR version of GURPS. And I like GURPS. I think GURPS, I especially like the fact that GURPS is so historical, is such a system that you can use it to run a gritty historical game, but still have it be something that you can kind of get wrap your head around without, being crazy. So the Fantasy Trip is neat because it takes GURPS and turns it into an OSR style thing where it's very simple, everything is very streamlined, and you don't have a lot of rules. You can do a lot more rulings, and I kind of liked it. So, but what this is here for is not because of the system itself. It's because this is the system where I really kind of, when I saw the Kickstarter for the Legacy Edition of Fantasy Trip to re-release everything, I wailed on it. I went full backer. I got all the things. And I've continued to get as many of the things as I can whenever there's a Kickstarter release for it. And I recently actually took into receipt a whole bunch more because I absorbed another person's collection of the Fantasy Trip that they were looking to pass on to another member of the gaming community. And that kind of brought me up to speed and got me even more of the things that I wasn't able to buy during Kickstarters because I have limited funds. I don't have deep pockets like other people do. So, but it's all of the things in the Fantasy Trip that really kind of blow my mind. Like the outdoor encounter decks, the NPC decks. When you got all these decks of these pre-made characters, and you're like, I need an NPC, and so you reach and you grab one. Yes! And so because of that, I started buying all those things for the Cypher System. So I got all like the NPC deck and the intrusion decks, and the encounter decks and all those other decks of cards. Partially because of the Fantasy Trip, and also because the DM that I was playing Numenera with also was using some of those things, and so I saw it in use, and it made sense to me. And so then I saw it for Fantasy Trip, and it made more sense to me, and I got more of them, and I loved them. So now I have those things for the Cypher System, and I use them. I've used them in many games by now, and they make running a game so much easier. It's amazing. I had no idea. I can't believe I went so many years of gaming and running games and not having these decks of cards to help me really just make stuff easier on myself and come up with stuff on the fly and be inspired. So now I've started to create my own decks of things. I have like no special paper stock that I use now to create my own decks of inspiration for when I run games for my friends or for myself. And I'm going to be using a bit more of that when I do future solo stuff. I want to work on something for the Prince Valiant system because when I ran that one solo game for Prince Valiant system, it kind of felt a little weird. But I think having a few more of these decks of cards and stuff is going to help me make that a bit smoother. So we'll see. I'll work on that before I do another Prince Valiant video. But that is why the Fantasy Trip is there. And the last one is actually the Prince Valiant system. This one is the most recent one that I have picked up that has had a an outsized impact on my role-playing game experience and how I view systems in general. Now, what is done here is to liken it to like food. D&D is kind of your steak and potatoes. D&D is good. It's delicious. A lot of people like it. It's going to be filling. I have a hard time finding people that say no to steak and potatoes. Fantasy Trip, that's like steak and potatoes with sauce. Not everyone's tasting, but it's still pretty good. Cypher System is like I view it as kind of like a really good stew where everything fits into the pot, and when it's done right, like a minestrone stew, it's delicious, and there's all bunch of different flavors, and you can do it a lot of different ways, and so it can be delicious and wonderful and fantastic. The white box, I would liken that to a really nice stir fry, because it's all the same components that you're already familiar with from like vegetables and stuff. It's all those good things, but you kind of throw it into a pot and you stir fry it up and you add a little sauce to it and you make it delicious, but you can still see all the component parts. Nothing melds into one like it does with a stew. It all remains their individual pieces, and you can still that's broccoli. That's kale or whatever it is you put in your stir fry. I'm not you. I'm not judging. So that's kind of neat. Word Legendary Adventures is kind of like your escargot, because it's a bit odd. It's a bit out there. It's not something that everyone gets, and it's hard to get unless you know where to go. But the people that like it really like it, and I want to see it back in print. Please put it back in print. And then lastly, for this kind of food analogy, we have the Riddle of Steel. I would put the Riddle of Steel at the level of, that really rare food item that almost no one ever gets, but everyone once they do get it, they're like, oh, I love that. So let's say Brazilian barbecue. Riddle of Steel is kind of the Brazilian barbecue. It's really fancy, really hard to get your hands on because it's been long out of print and no legal PDFs were ever released for it. And once you read it, it really kind of blows your mind. And once you eat that Brazilian barbecue, it kind of blows your mind. I went to a Brazilian barbecue place many years ago. First time I ever went to Kubla Khan. Actually, some friends of mine and we went to this Brazilian barbecue place that was not far from Kubla Khan, and it blew my mind. Let's put it that way. It was amazing. I will probably never eat that place again, not because I didn't like it, but because it was expensive, and now I'm on a special diet, and eating lots of meat is really not something I should be doing. But that's so Riddle of Steel, fantastic. It's wonderful. I'll probably never be able to afford anything like this again because it's extremely out of print and extremely expensive, but I love it. So to complete the food analogy, the Prince Valiant storytelling game, I would liken this to a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And that is because it is filling. It is relatively. It's not. I wouldn't call it nutritious because there's still a lot of peanuts, and some people are deathly allergic to peanuts. And the peanuts, I would say, is kind of like the setting. The setting for the Prince Valiant is it tries to be a wholesome setting. It tries to be the thing that everyone's going to love. But especially in the modern day, there's going to be a lot of people that are like, I can't handle that. I'm allergic to this and that and the other thing. And that's fine. Like, this is not, I'm using this analogy because I don't want people to feel like, I'm dissing Prince Valiant. I'm not. It's peanut butter. I love it. But just because I love it doesn't mean that someone else is going to love it. And there's going to be people who are deathly allergic to some of the topics and the themes that are put into this. And that's okay. They should be able to say that without anyone getting mad at them. But that's kind of what Prince Valiant is peanut butter. It's peanut butter and jelly. It's delicious. It can be wholesome if you make it that way yourself, but it can also be pretty toxic to people that don't really want it. So, and that's only because this system is garnered towards the setting of the comic of Prince Valiant, which is a dated comic and has a lot of the mores and the concepts of the 1930s in it. And if those bother you, if they make you uncomfortable, then you might want to avoid it. Oh, look at the kitty. She wants to come up and she's been begging to come on. So hopefully you can just see her now. Hi. Say hi. Okay. But at the same time, if you can compartmentalize that stuff out and say, yeah, that was the views of the time, but we don't have to do that way. And say, in my Prince Valiant campaign, in my world, there is no differentiation between men and women. And we're not going to sit here and make a bunch of bad jokes about people and what they look like. Okay. And I think that is perfectly in keeping with the concept of Prince Valiant, which is a idealized version of King Arthur's court that allows a young prince to go from rags and become an absolute champion of the court. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think that core concept is beautiful and wonderful, and the art is fantastic. I love it. And it's quite easy to, in my opinion, divorce the setting from a lot of the older style themes, like the idea that women can't actually speak for themselves in court and whatnot. A lot of it was done with the system in order to done with the system and setting in order to try to create this impression of a realistic medieval simulation. There's a place for that in the gaming world. There is a place for that, and this is no shade on Greg Stafford, the author of Prince Valiant System. If you really want to play a historically accurate game, you can do that, and you should do that. But for me, most of the time, I'm running a fantasy style thing, or I'm running a thing for people that really aren't historians, and I'm not claiming to be a historian myself. So I want to be able to play something that's going to be fun. Fun comes first. And to me, looking at the female players at my table, because I prefer having tables with men and women at it, and anyone else who wants to come in as well. If you don't identify with either gender, that's cool, because you're always welcome at my table. I don't care. If I have said something to offend you, then you should let me know, and I will apologize, because I'm never here trying to offend anyone. I open my darn mouth and make myself annoying. But ultimately, I still want people to come to the table and play games, and so just educate me, and I will, of course, listen. And people have done that, and I've really appreciated that. So, anyway, I am digressing again. Oh my gosh! So what was the thing about Prince Valiant that really kind of influenced me the most? Let's get back to that. Prince Valiant influenced me a lot because it showed me a very simple system. It showed me a simple system that I could grasp, that had shades of the Riddle of Steel in it. Because one of the things that I loved about the combat system in Riddle of Steel was the dice pool system that they used, and how they used that in order to create a very dynamic and moving combat. But what was neat is that Prince Valiant uses a very similar system. It's not the same. It's not the same at all. But it is fascinating that I can see the shades of similarity between that, which is kind of saying I see the shades of similarity between like an apple and an orange because they're both fruit. But it's there enough that I could see it, I could grok it, I made the association in my brain, and it makes sense to me. The other thing that this system does that I really enjoy is that it has, like I said in my review or recommendation video for it, is that it puts an equal emphasis on the social and the combat, and I think that's great. And it also divorces the game and the gameplay from the magic, because magic is kind of like out there. Player characters don't use magic in the Prince Valiant gaming system, and that's something I kind of, once I realized that, I was like, oh, I like this. I like this a lot, because every role-playing system I've ever read always has these chapters on magic, and they make this big deal about magic, and magic's got to be this thing. And I've had people tell me, like, if you don't have magic in the game, then I don't want to play. And to me, that's kind of like, I don't like that attitude. I don't like that attitude. I don't like having magic and everything, because personally, I really like games that focus on heroic actions. And to me, standing there on top of a cliff, waving your arms and casting a fireball that drowns all your enemies in flames and makes them die, while you're standing on top of that cliff and not getting hurt because you've got another shield spell up, that's not heroic. That's battle management. You're not a hero when you do that. You're basically just you're being a wizard, and you're commanding things in the sense of you're commanding the elements to do your bidding. But I like the hero that gets themselves dirty. I like the hero that's got the blood on their face, and they're hurt and they're wounded, and they've got their sword gripped in their hand, and there's like, one last charge on into the breach, dear friends, once more. That dynamic, that inspiring thing. Like, I'm getting chills just thinking about the idea of leading that charge into the breach, because that is where I want to be. I want to be that guy, whether we're playing a bard or a fighter or a paladin, or a cleric. I want to be that guy with the sword held in the air, rallying their companions, rallying their followers, and saying, once more on into the breach, dear friends, once more, let's go! Charge! you know, and just and sharing that passion, and that's my jam. That is my love. Anytime I see that in a movie, I get chills. Oh God, the Battle of Helm's Deep for me was like a constant chill fest because I loved watching that. I loved watching how that battle went. Basically almost all the big battles in Lord of the Rings. I was there for the big battles, like the whole thing with Frodo and Sam and Gollum. Like I was like, I know that I have to get. That's what I had to get through in order to get to the stuff I liked, which was the battles, the Siege of Minas Tirith, Helm's Deep, and all that stuff. Um, so that's what I really enjoy. And Prince Valiant showed me that it's possible to make a game that just says, you know what, magic, you're done. You're out of here. I don't care. There are magical items, but there's no wizards. Actually, no, there's one wizard. But you know what? There's only one wizard, so you're not going to play a wizard. You can play a charlatan who uses their skills to try to trick people into thinking that they're doing magic. That's fine. You can do that in this game. That's totally viable. But actual magic, you know, changing the world and making the laws of physics bend to your will doesn't happen in the Prince Valiant system. And I like that because over the past 10 years, I've been trying to make my own role-playing system and really put my own spin on it. And I've always stumbled over the magic system. I've tried to publish it a couple of different times, and I got the rough draft about like 90% there. Well, let's talk 75% there. But that remaining 25% is always the magic system. And I could never figure out a successful way, or a way that I liked to do magic, because I tried so many different things and nothing seemed to work. And then I read this system a few months ago for the first time. And, excuse me, and I suddenly said, well, duh. If magic's the problem, throw it out. So this has really inspired me to rethink how I approach writing my own system, and to say, you know what, maybe I just don't need that magic at all, and just get rid of it. And so basically, because of this, I have actually redoubled my efforts into trying to finish and actually decide on what system I want to make. Because now instead of trying to figure out what magic it is, I'm thinking about, you know, the original concept that I had, which is really cool dice system. I might talk about it at some point, or trying to do something that is you know, OSR oriented, which is very different than the original system that I'd been planning on doing. And it might be fun. I might do both. You know, I might actually do the same rule book, but for, you know, first for one system and then for the other. We'll see. Anyway, so that was why Prince Valiant was huge inspiration to me, and it continues to be so, and I still love it. Even though I have not been able to actually play a game of it, I still enjoy it, and it makes it onto this list with a boom. Okay, so those are the systems that have had a huge impact on me. I talked really fast. I hope you could understand at least some of what I was trying to say. I tried to be articulate. I'm going to slow down now, and I'm going to wish everyone a wonderful day. Thank you for stopping by. If you enjoyed this video, if I didn't annoy you with talking too fast, please like, comment, let me know. Maybe subscribe. If you felt that I was talking too fast and you would prefer the long form of this, I still have that hour-long video saved, and I will post that if people let me know that they want to hear my more long form, where I get a bit more into detail about each of these systems. I'll do that for you. Just let me know. Otherwise, I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thank you for stopping by. Peace be with you. Bye-bye.